My name is Stacy Ashmore Cole. I'm going to talk about my digital genealogy project called theyhadnames.net, which has created a searchable database of references to named African Americans in early records of Liberty County, Georgia. I'm going to provide an introduction to Liberty County, talk a bit about how I happened to create this particular project, and then describe the types of records it uses, where I found them, and tell some stories that are made possible by this kind of community-focused project. Many people think that there are not many records available for African American genealogy research from before the Civil War. The truth is that if the records exist for white people there, i.e. the county wasn't burned, they are likely there for African Americans as well. It's just that their names by first name only and in the records of their enslavers, if they weren't free people of color, are buried in those other records, and searching them is a tedious task. In the 1750s, the English colony of Georgia lifted its ban on slavery, and a group of European descended people, planters from around Dorchester, South Carolina, started migrating to the Midway area of what is now Liberty County, bringing with them about 3 times their number in enslaved people who were mostly from West Africa. Most histories of the Midway area focus on these white planters, but the truth is that Liberty County has been majority African American since that time, and West Africa has had a huge influence on the area's culture. I started researching my Liberty County ancestry in 2017. My people go back to the 1750s there, but I didn't know much about them. A newfound cousin gave me a copy of my 4th great-grandfather, John Ashmore's 1841 will. He died in 1849. The will named 11 people he was holding in slavery. I knew intellectually, of course, that my Georgia ancestors were likely to have been slaveholders, but seeing the actual names had a huge emotional impact. I decided to see if I could find out what happened to them. I was curious whether any of them might have taken the Ashmore surname and what it might mean if they had or they hadn't. I looked at the 1870 census, knowing that it was the first census in which a freedman would have appeared with his chosen surname, and there he was, Toby Ashmore, with his family. He was the only one of the 11 to have taken and kept the Ashmore surname. After I put together as much information as I could find, I decided to reach out to people on Ancestry who had Toby Ashmore in their tree, since his descendants could find him in the 1870 census as easily as I could. By this time, though, I had discovered more information about him from information those other newfound cousins had given me. One of the people who responded was Charlie, Toby's 2nd great-grandson. We exchanged information, met, and became friends. He was kind enough to give me access to his DNA, and that was when I discovered that we were also family. It's been a joy and a privilege to be his cousin, though I wish it could have been under other circumstances. Around that time, another huge influence came into my life. Hermina Glass Hill had moved from Atlanta to Liberty County. She is the premier historian of the life of Susie King Taylor, the formerly enslaved woman who wrote her memoir of her experiences in the Civil War as a nurse attached to her husband's United States Colored Troops unit. She was also a teacher and was a Liberty County native. Hermina and I met through serendipity as she was founding the Susie King Taylor Women's Institute and Ecology Center in Liberty County, and her passion for telling Susie King Taylor's story encouraged me as I began to consider how I could get the information I was discovering out there into the public domain. Finally, in the reading I was doing about Liberty County history, I was realizing that so many of the narratives, as I mentioned, eliminated or minimized the contribution that African Americans made in building Liberty County. They created the wealth that allowed these planters to have such an outsized influence on American political life. And yet this fact, and especially their names, were rarely mentioned in these history books. For example, the picture in the center is of William McWhirr, a famous Liberty County educator and clergyman, famous in his time at least. The biographical information about him made it sound as though he had a comfortable life because of his earnings from his teaching career. In fact, he married a wealthy widow who owned enslaved people, and he used the profits from selling them to finance his comfortable life. This is the whole story, not the whitewashed story that is normally told about such historical figures. So all these records wound up in the creation of this website. It brings together abstracts and transcripts into a searchable database with all these different kinds of documents. It has an annotated bibliography and a guide for visiting the area, plus research guides and notes to help other researchers, and some information about us as well. I say us because shortly after the project started, a friend, Kathy Dillon, volunteered to transcribe for the site. She has transcribed and abstracted many of the site's records for no reason other than that she thinks it's a story that should be told. How do you use the site? It's essentially a big blog. Each abstract or transcript is a blog post, and of course blogs are searchable. For example, if we search for the name Pulaski, we pull up every record that contains his name. And in the case of Pulaski, it's not a common name, so you can see that you don't get that many records, and it gives you a very good basis for a start in researching the particular person. So what does the website have? You'll see why I call this a community-focused project, because we are not focusing on individual family lines. Instead, we are putting online all the records for this county that name African Americans. There are probate records, church records, Southern Claims Commission transcripts, and research. All told, we now have documents with over 34,000 references to named African Americans. It turns out that there were a lot of antebellum records for Liberty County naming African Americans, but those names were omitted from the available research resources. In the 1960s and 70s, for example, the Georgia Genealogical magazine had abstracted many of the wills in counties throughout Georgia, but the abstracts almost always left out the names of the enslaved people. For example, here is how my fourth great-grandfather's will appeared. The only reason it was even mentioned that slaves were included was because of an unusual codicil. His son, Daniel Ashmore, was actually the 8th person admitted to the Georgia State Insane Asylum at Milledgeville, and he had to put a codicil in about what would happen to the enslaved people who had been designated for him. The original records, the wills, estate inventories, etc., were also all online by now, but not searchable, and at the time only indexed by the slaveholder's name. Ancestry, of course, is changing that for many of the probate records. As for where the records came from, almost all of them were found online. I don't go to the Liberty County Courthouse. This makes this a perfect project for individuals or groups to take on if they don't live in the county they're working on. Almost all of the records came from Family Search. Even though most of them are also on Ancestry, I tend to use Family Search as the reference because it's free. Some records were found online at the Georgia Archives Virtual Vault, and others came from the kindness of people who were strangers when I reached out to them. I'm going to dive into how to use Family Search to find these probate records and deeds. Many of you probably know this already, but I didn't when I started, so it may be news to someone else also. Most of the wills, estate inventories, and other documents naming enslaved people are online. They're just not indexed. You have to browse through them page by page and look at that chicken scratch old handwriting to find the names. Let's look at how you might do that. Go to search and then go to the catalog. You're not searching the records. Under the catalog, you can put in author because the county is the author of the record you're looking for. You can also do place, title, anything you want. I put in Liberty County, Georgia. Here are all the record sets that I come up with. If I go to the Court of Ordinary, for example, I will, which is the probate court, I will come up with inventories and appraisements of estates. You can also just go to the Georgia probate records that are online at Family Search, and you can get there that way. You browse through the images, unfortunately, then you choose your county, and here are all those probate records that were in the ordinary Court of Ordinary Records. If you click on a record set, you can see in the upper left there, there's 1,197 images. You choose that little icon to be able to see all of the images at once, so you can see what you've got and jump to where you might want to go. If you click on any of the images, it will make it full size. This is a method you can use. Unfortunately, what you have to do is page through these one by one and read the records, but this makes this so much easier doing it from the comfort of your own home, rather than having to go to the particular courthouse. In these records, you can find estate inventories, wills, and other records like estate accounts that name enslaved people. Pulling them together into a searchable database enables descendants to find the names of their ancestors in minutes, not years, that it would normally take. And you can see in the estate inventories, the wills, I've highlighted some of the things that you might find there. Here's how I post the documents. Some of the wills are done in abstract and some are transcribed. We use a standardized format for the estate inventories so that they can easily be pulled into another type of database format in the future. If needed, for example, our estate inventories were published on the enslaved.org website, and so it was fairly easy to do considering how I had constructed it in the first place. The names are kept in the order in which they were mentioned in the original document, because sometimes these are in family order, even if it's not stated. So you always need to be on the lookout for that. Let's look at an example. In 1877, Newton Bacon, a freedman, testified in a Southern Claims Commission petition and said he had been owned by Robert Charlton Hines when U.S. soldiers came through Liberty County foraging at the end of 1864. Newton is a relatively uncommon name, so when we search the They Had Names database, we also find that Newton was named in Charlton Hines's 1864 estate inventory. So why did he take the surname Bacon? The search revealed the answer and showed that he had been owned by the Bacon family in 1851 when they used him as collateral on a promissory note, which was a common practice. And in 1834 and 1843, 1834, when Major John Bacon's estate was first inventoried, and in 1843, when it was divided to his heirs. In Liberty County, most African Americans did not take the surname of their last enslaver, but often the surname they did take points to the early history of their family, as in this case. Deed records are the other really important set of documents in this project. Like the probate records, Family Search digitized them many years ago, and they are online, but not indexed digitally. Deed records naming enslaved people include bills of sale, marriage contracts in which a woman brings enslaved people into the marriage, and they're put in trust for her. Chattel mortgages in which slaveholders use their enslaved people as collateral on promissory notes, and deeds of gift in which parents or grandparents gave enslaved people, often enslaved children, to their own children or grandchildren. Here's how to find those records on Family Search. Again, search the catalog. And then again, we're going to search by author because the county is the author of the records. So we're looking for Liberty County, Georgia. Same process, but this time we're going to the Superior Court records, and then we're going to click on deeds and mortgages. As we scroll down, we see that there are actually court-created indexes that you can look at. Quite a number of them actually, and then we get into actual deeds and mortgages book. The little camera on the right hand side means that these are have been digitized and you can look at them. So if we click on a record set, we will see, we can click on an individual record. This is the index, and we will see that we can search through the index for the particular name of the slaveholder we're looking for example. In this case, we find it's in Book X, page 140. We go back, and then we go look for Book X, click on it, and then we can't immediately jump to page 140 because the image numbers don't correspond to the pages, but we can just click somewhere in the document. We got pretty close, 134, and so we can just guess what image that might be, and I just happened to guess correctly, so now we're on page 40 where we could find that record. Of course, the other thing you can do, which is what I'm doing now, is go through the deed records page by page, looking for records at the time period that you're interested in. These records are time-consuming to abstract, but so worthwhile as they often give details not available anywhere else. It was common to give the ages of the enslaved people, their family relationships with each other, or even their trades, and sometimes even their tribal origin. I just found a record from 1809 in which it specified that some of the people were from the Igbo tribe. So far, I've completed the deed records naming enslaved people from 1777 to 1809 and from 1821 to 1865, and I'm working on the earlier records. When I abstract them, I always use a strict format so that the abstracts can be parsed at some point and added to a larger database. Another example of the stories that pop out from these records, Sherman's army reached Liberty County in December 1864, and that is when most of the enslaved people learned that they were free. Anne McConnell chose to sell Josephine, a 12-year-old girl, away to Florida in November. The record was recorded on December 5th, 1 week exactly before the soldiers showed up. Did Josephine have to go to Florida? If she did, was she able to return to her family? I haven't found the answer to that yet. Life in Liberty County was focused around the church, in this case, the Midway Congregational Church, founded in 1752. It had both white and black members from its earliest days, and the black members followed the same process for membership as the white members did. The church as it stands today is seen on the right. The current building dates from 1792, with the earlier building having been burned by the British during the Revolutionary War. The church operated as a church from 1752 to 1867, and it kept detailed records. The records of the white members were published years ago in the History and Published Records of the Midway Congregational Church by James Stacy, but there were quarterly session records in meetings in which they recorded new memberships, departures for other churches, and disciplinary cases, and those were not included in his book. I found them by accident online. There were 3,889 references to named African-American members in those records, both enslaved and free. The little, on the picture on the left, of course, an older picture, that door on the left is the entrance to the slave gallery in the church, which is seen right here in current day. This is what those records looked like, including the earliest reference to named African-American members, Scipio and Judy, who became members on June 26, 1756. I turned those references into a sortable spreadsheet with those 3,889 references. My current project is recreating the African-American member list from this and researching the members in other records. It looks like there were a total of 1,200 to 1,400 African-American members over that period from 1752 to 1867, when the church disbanded and the African-American members started their own church and leased the church building, essentially saving that beautiful building after the Civil War. They later founded another church, the First Midway Presbyterian Church down the road, and that is where the historical marker for Susie King Taylor that I showed in the slide about Hermina Glass Hill is located. Susie King Taylor lived in that area. In 1846, a white preacher named Charles Colcott Jones made a census of every African-American member of a church in Liberty County's 15th district, which is where most of the big slaveholders lived. There are 1,146 people mentioned on this list. The top image is of that list is of that list for the people held in slavery by John Ashmore, my fourth great grandfather. And you see Toby's name there on the list. He was attending the North Newport Baptist Church, which later became the current First African Baptist Church, the oldest African-American church in Liberty County. You see 5 other names on the list for him. This was one of the most, and they're attending different churches. This was one of the most surprising things about this research to me, that church membership apparently was a choice for at least some enslaved people in this county. The list on the bottom is for the Pleasant Grove Church, and you'll see Toby's name there also. He was baptized into that church in 1832. So obviously church records can be a very profitable source of research. Many counties also have court records that have been digitized. Even though They Had Names was designed for antebellum records, I like to try to trace people after emancipation. And of course, we all run into the difficulties during that period between 1880 and 1900 because we're missing the 1890 census. Kathy and I went through the court records for the period from 1865 to 1919 and pulled out all the divorce records into a table. Often the divorce records will give the names of minors and other details. So it's also a very fruitful source for research. After the Civil War in 1871, the U.S. government set up the Southern Claims Commission to take applications for compensation for supplies taken from loyal Southerners for the use of the U.S. Army. Of course, by loyal, they meant loyal to the Union. At least 144 Liberty County residents, both white and African American, made claims, 86 of which were approved. Each claimant had to answer a long list of questions, provide detailed information on the property that was lost and how it had been acquired to prove ownership, and call witnesses to testify as to both loyalty to the Union and the facts of the case. The case files are now online and are a rich source of information about life in the particular county at the time. The They Had Names site has so far posted more than 60 full transcripts of the Liberty County Southern Claims Commission case files, and I've posted research on more than 40 of the claimants, tracing their lives back into slavery and forward into freedom using the other records available on the website. Kathy Dillon, the volunteer transcriber, transcribed many of the claims. Research in the Southern Claims Commission led me to the work of Dr. Peggy Hargis. She's a retired associate professor from Georgia Southern University. She had compiled a list from those case files of all the formerly enslaved claimants and witnesses with the names of their enslavers. And I found that list at the Dorchester Academy African American Museum in Liberty County. She very kindly gave me permission to use the list, so I created a sortable spreadsheet for the website. This list of about 275 people reveals that only about 10% of Liberty County's free people took the surname of their last enslaver, as we discussed earlier. These claims also represent some of the few documents we have in which the formerly enslaved people of Liberty County were able to express their feelings about slavery in their own words, probably, and just a few years after formal slavery ended for them. The statements, as you can see, are very moving. I mentioned the kindness of strangers. I waited to start reaching out to others until I had the website already online and had done a good amount of work so that they would know I was serious and that I had already checked the other available sources. Then I contacted Dr. Erskine Clark, who wrote Dwelling Place, an amazing book about Charles Colcock Jones in Liberty County and the people he held in slavery, and Dr. Peggy Hargis, who I already mentioned. Both have been more than helpful and have led me to documents I couldn't have found otherwise. Dr. Clark donated his papers to the Columbia Theological Seminary, where archivist Brian Hecker has been just so tremendously helpful. If you're going to put records like this online, what are some of the considerations? You don't need to be an expert. All you need to be able to do is read old handwriting, and you'll get better at that the more of it that you do. Just put the records out there and let other people be the experts. You need to decide whether you're going to do a free website or a paid website. A free website will stay online basically forever. A paid website gives you a chance to do some more interesting things with it. So that's the choice I made. But if you do a paid website, you do need to make arrangements so that the data is cared for if something happens to you. People ask me, why online? Why not in a book? Well, online, it's so much easier to search and to bring the information together so that you can really analyze it. It's so much more tedious in a book. Easy options for doing this. You can just do it on WordPress.com, a free blog. That's how I started. Just every record was a blog. And a blog by definition is searchable. So that's a very easy way to do it. That blog is still online. It basically stays there forever. Molly Maines-Ferreter, someone else who's doing this kind of work, came up with a great idea. And that's if you use a Google Doc to record your research, you can easily attach that to Google Sites, which makes it online and searchable via Google. So you don't really have to do anything other than do the initial setup and then start typing away. Facebook groups, you can go and put the information you have there. And then there's also the Beyond Kin project, which is a particular methodology for recording the information you find on sites like Ancestry. So let's tell a story about tracing the slave owners and why it's so important. Tracing the lines of inheritance explains why enslaved people were where they were. This is an example of the critical importance of a community-focused approach. Here are 5 men from Liberty County, dying at different times. They all held people in slavery. What else did they have in common? They were all married to this woman, Margaret Stacy. I don't know when she was born. I don't know when she died, but I found records for her with all 6 of the surnames she had between her marriage to Thomas Goulding in 1784 and her marriage to Williamson in 1818. I just didn't know they were all the same woman until I started putting it together. Also, while it was common for women whose husbands died, leaving them with young children, to remarry quickly, I find this one a little suspicious. I mean, she attended estate inventories for 2 husbands in the same year, so not sure. I started using mind maps for people like this. Look how complicated this is. She had children with 2 of the husbands, but this shows you the enslaved people she took from marriage to marriage, and using a mind map like this gives you a chance to to put these people in a place and time and see whether or not you can trace them, how far you can trace them. Her story illustrates the benefits of this community-focused approach. Since I found her records without realizing they were all for the same person, and I probably never would have realized it without having all the records in a searchable database. But it also illustrates the risk, because it's very easy to see what we want to see and disregard the unknowns. Especially when there are a lot of records, it's so tempting to draw connections that may not exist. In this case, there was a Lucy and a Jim in the 1802 estate inventory, then again in 1815, and then again in 1818. But there were also a Lucy and a Jim in a different 1815 estate inventory for a different husband, again in 1818 for Jim and Lucy. Are these the same Lucy and Jim? Because there are also a Lucy and Jim in these other estate inventories, I assume that it's not. But in this case, she happened to specify that the one Jim and Lucy were children. So I believe the first line here is correct for Lucy and Jim. But if she hadn't mentioned that, well, it's so easy to make a mistake. And this really illustrates the benefits versus the risk. You have to be careful with this kind of project. Of course, as you do with anything in genealogy. So I hope that at the very least, I've made you want to visit Liberty County. Some of the places you'll want to see while you're there. On the right here, Hermina Glass Hill is now president of the Liberty County Historical Society. She's the first African-American to be the president of that society. And she has an exhibit for Susie King Taylor in their office downtown, and you won't want to miss that. If you go to Liberty County. The Dorchester Academy has deep roots in Liberty County. It has that African-American museum that I mentioned finding Dr. Peggy Hargis's records at. And it now also has a civil rights exhibit because Dr. Martin Luther King lived for a period of time at Dorchester Academy during the civil rights era. And Hermina Glass Hill curated that exhibit. There's also the Midway Museum, which is next to the Midway Church that I showed you earlier. That tells the history of the white planters who founded the Midway Church and Society. That's a replica of a period house there, but they have a lot of original furnishings and art and great docents who tell interesting stories. The Sankofa organization has the African American Heritage Trail, which is a driving trail. I've put more information about all of these in the handout, and of course you'll want to check before you go to see what their current status is. If you think you might have ancestors from coastal Georgia, here are some of the resources you'll want to check out, the online resources. Ujima Genealogy of Coastal Georgia is a network of researchers, in particular Terry Ward, Adolphus Armstrong, Michelle Johnson, all doing amazing work. There's a website and a Facebook page, and they've done videos as well. And there's information on all of these in the handout. GlenGen.com, Amy Hedrick has been researching coastal Georgia for more than 20 years and has put what she's learned on her website. There's also a Facebook page and group. And Burning of Darien used to be a small museum in Darien, McIntosh County. Eunice Moore, Dr. William Collins, Missy Brandt Wilson. I believe the museum has closed, but they are still willing to do genealogical research. And again, details in the handout. Thank you so much for listening to this talk. You can contact me anytime at jnscole@yahoo.com. I will be donating the fee for today's presentation to the Susie King Taylor Escape to Freedom Underground Railroad Park, and there are details in the handout.